Hi, I'm going to show you how to paint a treescape over the next 5 videos. So I'm going to be separating out each stage for you and you can follow along at your own pace. We're going to be working with acrylics, and this is suitable for beginners as well as those of you who've already done a little bit of painting and maybe want to try a slightly different approach, because we're going to be adopting my normal approach to painting. So there's going to be a few things there that might be new to you if you've already been doing a little bit of painting acrylics, but also if you're starting with acrylics, then hopefully this is going to give you a great way to get started and build your confidence. So the first thing I'm going to do to get started is I'm going to underpaint my canvas. I want to get rid of the white. The white can be disruptive, it can reflect light back into your face, it can be intimidating, and also you might find yourself really trying to cover it. I want to create a painting that has depth and that the colours look like they're really seated on something and they look really yummy. If you paint straight onto white canvas, you'll find that your paints can often look a little bit thin. So it's good practice to cover your canvas in an underpaint. Now that's just going to be acrylic, and you can choose any colour you like as long as it's not too bright. So really probably ruling out yellow. A good rule of thumb is to start off with a mid-value colour. So mid-value relates to how dark or light the paint is. So whether it's as dark as black or as light as white. And if you go somewhere in the middle, that can be really useful, because when you start painting on top of that colour, any colour that you put on top, you can judge whether it's light or dark in relation to that mid-value. So if you're unsure, start with the mid-value, perhaps maybe a grey-blue, which is a great starting point. The challenge I give to you, however, is to start like I do, which is painting on black. So it's quite, I'm not sure whether intimidating is the right word, but it can be quite tricky if you're not used to painting on such a dark colour. But I trust you, it's worth the experimentation. I love it. It creates such wonderful darks and depths. And for me, it feels logical because, of course, everything is dark, everything is black until light comes in. So it just feels that I'm conjuring up light onto my canvas as I paint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my chosen colour, black, and a big brush. We don't want to be covering our canvas with a small brush. It's going to take us absolutely forever. So something like this, which is a mottler brush, or even better, a paddle brush. So a paddle brush, the brushes are a little bit shorter, and so therefore you can really push the paint in. I'm going to slightly dilute my paint because I don't want it to go on too thick. I still want to feel the grain of the canvas coming through, and I want it to dry fairly quickly. And if I water it down ever so slightly, it should go on nice and evenly. So I've got quite a wet brush. I'm going to go straight into the black, and then I'm going to really push that brush in to start covering the canvas. It doesn't matter what direction your paint marks go. You can be neat and tidy and all horizontal, or you can be lovely and crazy and loopy like me. So I'm going to get on and finish underpainting the canvas, a little bit of paint, a little bit of water, and I'm going to get the whole thing covered. Now we wait for paint to dry. Don't watch it, it'll take longer. And then she goes and watches it. So all dry. And the next thing to think out is, what exactly are we painting? So I'm going to be working from a photograph that I've taken in Savernake Woods, which are these amazing woods near Wiltshire in the south of England. So this is the image that I'm going to be working from. So this is just early autumn. It was quite muted light. You can see there's just enough light there for the shadow across the ground. And some of the leaves are just beginning to go orange. Now, I've selected this photograph because I love the composition. I love those big 4 trees standing together opposite the track. And I love some of the shapes of the branches and also the colours. So initially, when you look at the photograph, it's very complex. Obviously, there's lots of little leaves and there is tons of information that we need to understand in order to put that onto the canvas. One thing that helps me to transfer images onto canvas is gridding. It's not for everybody, but I'm going to grid from this photograph onto the canvas. So what I've done first is I've gridded out the photograph. The photograph is the same proportion as this canvas. So this canvas is 60 by 80 and that photograph is 3 by 4. So they're both related. So both of those proportions are the same. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my pastel pencil. So I've got a white Pitt pastel pencil. You could use chalk if you prefer. And I'm going to just roughly divide my canvas into thirds, vertically and horizontally. Now, it doesn't have to be precise. It really doesn't. We're just painting from nature, so therefore we don't need to have any sort of precision like perhaps you might do in doing a portrait. So once I'm gridded out, I can then start to compare my grid with the photograph. The first thing I want to do is I just want to go back and have a look at the complexities of this photograph. What I want to do is sort of bring it down into big shapes. So I'm not really looking at the detail. I'm trying to just see some of the larger shapes in there, and that's going to help me sketch out. So if we take a look at the first thing, and that's the trees. So we've got 4 main trees that stand fairly equally across the canvas. But look how our grid can help us position some of those trees. So the 2 middle trees are almost exactly on those grid lines. The tree on the left is coming up, well, probably left of centre in that third along the side. And then the tree on the right, again, is a little bit pushed further over, a little bit closer to the edge. So I'm going to use that grid, that knowledge, and those big shapes of the trees to get started. So I'm going to hold my pastel pencil at the end. I don't want to hold it like a pencil because that means I'll press too hard and I'll end up being really close to the canvas. I want to hold it at the end, and if you're using chalk, this is even easier to do. Just hold it at the end. And with a fairly outstretched arm that allows me to keep stepping back from the canvas, I'm going to start just making a few marks. There is no point measuring, and fussing and stressing over those first marks. Get something on the canvas, then you can decide whether it's in the right place or not. And because you're using a chalk or a pastel pencil, if you're not happy with it, you can rub it out. But just be free, be a little bit loose. No one's going to judge you. No one's going to say it doesn't look exactly like the photograph. We don't want it to look exactly like the photograph. We're creating something unique. We're creating something of our own. So I'm going to start with that easy tree now. It's all very well. The tree is roughly along that line. It leans a little bit. But let's just use the grid as well to see where that tree starts. So is it halfway along that line? Well, no, it's a little bit above halfway. That's a great start. So I'm going to mark halfway and then I'm going to let it stop just above that halfway line. And the next interesting thing is, let's sketch it leaning a little bit, is where does that tree end? Well, who knows? We're not there. We can't move the foliage apart to see where it finishes. So if we can't see it, we won't sketch it. There's perhaps a little bit of a branch. I think that might belong to the other tree. Let's just let that tail off. I'm just stepping back. Notice how my sketch has lots of small marks, and some of the marks I might not use, some of them I'll refine later. But I'm stepping back and I'm beginning to, with that very early bit of information, I'm beginning to visualize what the painting might look like. So let's go for the next tree. So I've already got this tree in, so I can use not only the grid lines now, but I can also use the tree that I've already sketched in to give me an idea of where the other tree goes. Well, the best clue is that it starts at about the same height. So I'm going to use that to give me a starting point for sketching in the tree that's on the other side of the canvas. So a couple of marks, stepping back, taking the opportunity as I step back to have a look at the photograph as well. And this part of the tree ends somewhere over there. Got these two in. That's going to help me think about where this one is. So this tree is about in the middle, but slightly over to the left. But I think the edge of the tree is about in the middle there. And if I compare it to the two trees I've already sketched, I can see that it starts lower. Now, the fact that it's starting lower down the canvas means it's closer to us. So that's going to give us a lovely sense of depth. So I think it finishes about there. I might even bring it down a little bit more, because this is my painting. I can do what I like to it. Lovely, dropping my hand, stepping back. Okay, now just before I get to this grid line here, I notice that there's a lovely branch that sort of does that and then goes up a bit and then probably tails off a little bit. So I'm going to use that. And the wonderful thing about painting trees is you start to really notice things that maybe you wouldn't notice if you were just walking through the woods. So these are beech trees, and beech trees always have branches that come off at an angle. They don't come out straight like you might see in pine trees, but they come out just at a little angle. So you've got this lovely little shape here, just in the crook of the branch. And so that will help to make it look more like a beech tree and more realistic. Okay, let's keep going. What I have noticed is there's a little bit more of a lean on that tree coming into the composition, which I haven't copied. And I'm just wondering whether I want to keep it. You know what? I do. I quite like it. So I'm just going to resketch. So I'm just going to use a little bit of damp kitchen paper. There we go. That feels better. I prefer that. I like the way that leans in. But again, you're painting your rules. You can decide what you'd like to do and how you'd like it to look. Okay, so that's those three trees. Let's just continue with the other ones. So just stepping back now, just to take a look, see if we can visualize the composition and see if it's pleasing and if it's working for us. So the advantage of starting with the trees as well, it gives us a little bit of a network, and it also develops the idea of the grid. So it gives us, in this case, 4 and a little one, more shapes that we can use to find all the other shapes. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sketch in a few of the branches. I'm not going to do all of them because we'll be here till Christmas and it's going to start getting into too much detail. We just want to create the impression of this image. We don't want to create every single twig and stick that we can see. So looking at the photograph, I've isolated a few of the branches that I really like the look of. And I like particularly the ones on the left-hand side, because they give me this wonderful drooping shape. So I'm going to sketch a couple of those in. They also serve another purpose in that they're going to help me pop the foliage in later. So we've got a lovely branch that comes down there, more that come across. And one thing I'm doing as I'm sketching is I'm trying to wiggle my brush and vary my pressure as I sketch each branch. And that way, hopefully, they look a little bit more realistic. There's another one that goes down here. Quite like the look of that one. Then we've got longer ones that go across here. And then we've got this wonderful canopy of leaves coming from the top. And I love the shape of that. So let's have a quick look. There's the first branch, I would say, in that middle area, which is slightly off center, and it fills up quite a large part of that section of the grid. Just going to step back, make sure I'm not getting too small, don't get too tidy either. This is just a sketch, this is just a roadmap, nothing more. You're not going to have to share this with anybody, it's not going to have to look perfect. The only purpose of this is to check whether the composition looks pleasing to you, whether you can visualize what it's going to look like. And the second, more important thing, is it and how is it going to help you start painting? So let's just bring in that branch there as well. And there's a couple more up here, and there's one there. Again, not all of them, and some of them I might bring in later as I start painting. Nothing is set in stone here, and I can add to or take away. So that's the trees, that's the branches. The next thing I'm going to establish is the horizon line. And we've got lots of wonderful green stuff. We've got lots of bushes and bracken all along the floor of the woods here. So it's very hard to see a very straight horizon. So what I'm looking for is really the area where I think things are growing on the ground versus the things that I think are growing from trees or above the ground. So I'm going to start off at the left here. And I'm going to just sketch a line in the corner, which is the top of that bracken. And that almost comes down as a slope. So let's actually draw it as a slope. Even though I'm sketching over the trees, doesn't matter. I can rub those out, no problem. What I love about this composition as well is that we've got this lovely pathway that's going through the trees. And that's giving us a lovely sense of perspective. So in finding the horizon line, let's see if we can find sort of the end of that path. So right at the top, roughly, if we look at the grid, roughly along sort of here, I think. And then we have either side of that pathway. And then I guess we've got a lot of foliage coming up here. And then I think maybe there's a hanging edge of the hanging bough of leaves there. So I'm going to say roughly that's roughly where we've got the edge of the ground and the beginning of above ground. The next thing I'm going to do is going to sketch the pathway in. It really takes us into the composition. So these two edges of the pathway are roughly parallel in real life, but our perspective shows them converging or getting closer as they go off into the distance, and that's perspective. So the width of the path in the foreground is much wider than the width of the path in the distance. So what that creates is almost like a triangle. I'm going to find the edge of the path in the distance and then the edge of the path in the foreground. So I'm just going to make two little marks to show those 2 points, and then I'm going to connect those 2 points with a little bit of a wavy line, but that shows me the edge of the path. I'm going to do the same on the other side. So this is the edge of the path in the distance. And then this is the edge of the path in the foreground. They're almost over each other, but not quite. So that creates this lovely perspective, taking us into the composition. So we have the trees, we have the branches, we have the suggestion of a horizon line, and we have the rough outline of the path. So you can see we're just looking at big shapes. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. So I've got great structure. These are all the structural things. I don't want to look at the detail of each individual leaf. I want to look at the big shapes that maybe a big clump of leaves are creating. So if we start on the foreground again, we've got this lovely fern that comes in from the side here, just underneath that tree. And then sort of some grasses that do that. And then they come a little bit close to the edge of the path there. So that's, to me, that's one big shape. Maybe we could divide that a little bit. Then the next big shape here, well, I already sketched a bit of it here. So it sort of comes in all the way down that third line. And let's just be clear about what this line is here. To me, that's the edge of the sort of grey bit of the pathway. So there's actually a sort of section of leaves at the edge of that pathway. So that's what that is. Now you can always write in your canvas as well if you get confused later on about what it is that you're creating. So I'm just going to write here leaves. So I don't forget that's what that is. So this is quite a big shape here, this bottom corner. That's really just the top of that bracken and those grasses. So I'm going to break it up a little bit. There's this sort of shape here on the edge there, and I'm just going to cut it in half to remind myself to maybe make some shorter marks here so it feels like it's getting closer to us. What am I going to do next? I'm just flicking my eyes back and forth between the photograph and the canvas, and sometimes it helps just to squint your eyes as well, or just see those large shapes. And I'm at a distance from my inspiration as well. So again, I'm not trying to look for all of those little individual shapes and marks. I'm still looking at the big shapes from a distance. And actually, if I squint my eyes, I can see this wonderful shape, which is that shadow line that's lovely and dark. It sort of goes across a little bit of a bump there. And of course, that bump is some grasses. Let's get that other little bit of green in. There's like a slanty rectangle shape there. There's another shadow that goes across here. And then everything else is too weeny for me to bother about at this point. You know what I might also do is I might just sketch in the edge. There's that lovely shape of the leaves coming in there. Okay, I don't want to make it too complicated. So that's as much as I'm going to do in the foreground anyway. And then let's have a look at some of the bigger shapes that we can see in the foliage. This is how to deal with the foliage. Look for changes of colour, changes of scale, changes of value, so light and dark. And we've got all of those happening in the top third to a half of this composition. You can see that bough of leaves coming down from the top. It's much lighter and the shapes are much bigger. It's quite a distinct shape as well. So I'm going to start off, always start off with the easy bits. I'm going to start off by just sketching in that shape. Not the individual shapes within, but just the clump of it. And I'm, again, exactly as I was doing before, flicking my eyes between the photograph and the composition on the canvas, dropping my hand, stepping back to make sure I'm getting things in roughly the right place, using my grid and also the trees that I've also drawn already, just to place some of those shapes in. Think, does it go to the grid? Is it near a separating part of the grid? There we go. Looks bizarre. Looks bizarre as a sketch, big old lump, but I'm happy with that so far. The other big shape I'm seeing are these wonderful sweeps of the greenery come down from the branches of the trees. This is one of the things that attracted me to this composition, was the uprightness of those trees, but then the diagonals of the boughs coming down. So I'm going to use that branch that I sketched in before just to delineate where those lovely big sweeping shapes of clumps, bunches of leaves, foliage as they're coming down from the tree. Okay, there's a little bit more there. I quite like that shape. Now, obviously, there's spaces in between that I haven't done anything. But to me, nothing really pops out. It's not really, really light. It's not really, really dark. There's not really a strong colour. It's bitty. So I'll deal with that when I start painting. We've also got a little bit of information to be put in that sort of distance area there as well. So I think, again, just a brevity of mark. We don't want too much detail. I think look, there's even a little maybe shape at the back there. There's definitely some darker green coming through there. And there's that sort of lighter green there. This all here is quite light green. And then there's definitely a sort of shape of something here as well, roughly. So I'm stepping back from my sketch now. Now, to anyone else, they'll probably look at that and go, I have no idea what's happening there, but I do. And that's what's important. If I put any more information in there, then I am going to get lost and I'm going to wonder what's happening. So that's all I need to do, is just a guide to get me started. So again, pencil down, step back, have a look at it, see if I can visualize the painting, and also just have a look if there are any other elements that I think might need amending or changing. Let's just put in a little bit of detail around that tree and around the distance. Is there anything that worries me? Well, at the moment, yeah, but I'll resolve it as I go along. That's half the fun of the painting. And can I visualize what it's going to look like? Well, roughly, I think so. I don't want it to be completely exact because I want to be able to make changes as I start painting. I don't want to be too prescriptive and too down a narrow field. I want to be able to go, yeah, I'll add another tree in or I'll put some more branches in. But this is going to serve as just enough to get started. So I hand over to you. So get your canvas underpainted, use any colour that you like, but if you're willing to take on the challenge, use black. Use a wide brush, little bit of water, not too much, you don't want to dilute the paint too much, and paint that underpaint all over. Wait for it to dry. Grid out if you want to. Not everyone loves a grid, and I totally get that. And then feel free to use the image. There'll be a link in the notes so you can get a decent copy of it as well. And then start looking for the big shapes and how they relate to the grid. And my advice is start with the trees. Well, they bring the bones of the composition. And then once you're done, we can move on to the next bit, which is getting the paint out. So I'll see you in the next video.